Good morning, everybody, and hello to you all on this International Women's Day. And obviously hope everybody has been out and voting or intending to vote. So here we are, and the first symposium that we have today is reflecting on the contributions of women to Trinity College Dublin since 1904. And this is going to focus on the personal experiences of women in Trinity in the past. And we are incredibly lucky to have behind me here a panel of amazing women who are trailblazers in every sense of the word. So we're going to start with Mary Harney. We also have Ivana Bacik here this morning, and we have Professor Eda Sagarra, we have Professor Jane Grimsom, and we have our Provost, Professor Linda Doyle as well. So I believe we're going to start, Mary, with you. Oh yeah. Sorry, my order was slightly off. Apologies on you. We're going to start with Professor Eda Sagarra. Thank you. Apologies. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are a bit steep.
You know, it's just in case I topple.
Oh, yeah, well, that would be a great start.
Now, here we go. Start. Well, when I look round, ladies and two gentlemen, I hope you're feeling comfortable. I mean, I'm talking about the latter. When I look round, I realise I was asked to speak today because I was around when your grandparents were still twinkles in their parents' eyes. So, age before beauty. I am a blow-in. My first encounter with Trinity was in 1951. I was a student of history and German in UCD, just across the green in Earlsford Terrace. But we never encountered our peers from Trinity. Trinity students allegedly dubbed our institution the hedge school in Earlsford Terrace. And so what could we say but Trinity was the place for rejects from Oxbridge? And then by chance one February evening in some local hostelry, the officers of our college history society, I was a student of history and German, a very ineffective one, I have to say. Once I remember, I was told to invite some very eminent journalist from London, and he wrote to say he was coming the next day, and I said, but you're not due until next week. Oh, he said, I am. I said, would you ever mind putting it off until next week? Because I was terrified the secretary of the History Society would murder me. So that was how it was. But we decided to have a joint historical fancy dress ball, and Trinity very nobly offered to host it. So 2 days later, I was summoned by the president of UCD. He had been a neighbour of ours in my childhood. And he sat me down and said, let me give you some good advice. And, you know, my heart sank. You should not go ahead with this ball. And I said, why not? If you are interested in your future career, I wouldn't advise it. The Archbishop would not approve. And this actually incident was one of the reasons why I decided to emigrate when I finished my studies. 7 years later, I found myself in Trinity being interviewed for a job, which I didn't get. But people were so nice to me, I thought, this is wonderful, and they were courteous. And I had been used to the hierarchical order of Germany, German and Austrian universities, so I thought this was great, and I was quite happy. Then, 17 years later, after years in Germany and in Manchester University, I found myself being quizzed by the chair of the Appointments Committee, known familiarly to the history students as the OT, about my suitability for the chair of German at Trinity. She opened the proceedings with saying, Mrs. Sagarra, she didn't like foreign names, Mrs. Sagarra, where were you at school? Where were you at school, I asked. So I told her. And it wasn't a convent, so she was surprised. And then she said, was your father in Trinity? And I couldn't lie, so I said no. But anyway, I don't know how appointments to chairs are conducted now, But in those days, you had 2.5 days where every single word and gesture was observed. You went from officer to officer, college, department, and faculty. And I loved every minute of it, but I made an awful mess of the main interview. So when the secretary rang me up next day, I was a bit nervous that I wouldn't get my expenses. So I kept on talking. And he said, if you'd give me an opportunity, Dr. Sagarra, we're offering you the job. And quite honestly, I'm not making this up, I said, why on earth would you? That's another story. I was very surprised when I arrived. One of the first tutorials I had, and it wasn't the last, I was quizzed as to what my religion was. I couldn't see what on earth they wanted to know that for, and also what that had to do with the job. But that's how it was in those days. Accents were different, even among some of the students. And we had a student at one stage who was the son of the head of the Irish Armed Forces. And he was on a summer job in Germany. And some of his mates from UCD and UCC in Galway said, how on earth did you get into Trinity with your Tipperary accent? They wouldn't have you, would they? In other words, information about Trinity, even in the 70s, tended to be full of disinformation. And it took actually quite a lot of hard work to change that. Then in the odd thing about Trinity was the governance. There had been famous female forebears before my time. I think when I was appointed in 1975, I was the only full professor in the place who was a woman. I may be wrong about it, medical school. Certainly I was the only woman on board, and when members debated and challenged the idea that women's staff should be entitled to maternity leave, who will pay your pensions if there are no children, I mused. But that didn't seem to be important to them. Then in 1981, Provost Watts took over. I don't know if you're familiar with who are the best feminists. This is a rhetorical question. Fathers of clever children, particularly whose daughters are cleverer than their sons. He was only in the job a few days when he summoned me, and I canvassed vigorously against him, so I thought I was in for ticking on the... But no, he asked me would I be registrar. And this was the first time I think a woman in British Isles had been asked to be registrar. Now I know registrar in Trinity was not quite as arduous as in some places because the senior lecturer did so much else. But when I was, as soon as I was registrar, I was appointed to about 20 plus committees, and I chaired most of them. And I found that neither at officers nor at the committee that I chaired was there virtually ever a woman. It was all men. And when I suggested at officers' meetings that I might survey the college committees and identify potential women candidates, this was most warmly received by my fellow officers. It proved quite difficult to implement, I think partly because women were not used to positions of trust and authority, and they were a bit cagey. Also with family commitments and work commitments and research commitments, it was difficult. But a start had been made, and under Bill Watt's successors, as we'll hear in a moment, particularly from Jane Grimsom, college's first Vice-Provost, and then Frances Ruan was appointed to chair the Committee on Women's Position in Dublin University, with very positive results, but only in time. But there was a great deal of unfinished business, and I just give one example in conclusion. Senior promotion, that is to professorships and senior lectureships, depended effectively on the recommendation of the head of department. And men are many things, if you'd excuse gentlemen here, but not all of them has a great deal of imagination. So it wasn't necessarily ill will, but it was a lack of imagination that their choice tended to fall on the men in their department. So the outlook then, even then, for clever mavericks, who often the best choice, though risky, and for women in general, though risky, was not great. But that plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose is not true of Trinity, particularly from the late 20th century and the early 21st century. You just have to look around you to see. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Sagarra. And we're now going to have Ivana Bacik TD up to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, Guramahagut, Lynn, and thank you for the introduction. And a hard act to follow, speaking after Professor Eda Sagarra, if I may say. And if any of you haven't already read Eda's wonderful book, I strongly recommend you do, because it'll give you a really lovely, humorous overview of that wonderful career that she touched on just so lightly and so beautifully just now. And as Eda has said, there's a great deal of unfinished business around when we mark International Women's Day, a great deal of unfinished business that we might reflect upon as we reflect on how far we've come as women in Irish society, as women in Trinity, and I still count myself a Trinity woman, even if I've left Trinity now formally back in 2022. But I've had a long connection with the college, and I'm always, I think like all of us here, I'm always so thrilled to be back, and it's always so lovely to be back in this historic building in particular, with so many, all of us I think, have so many memories of this building, I'll briefly say that there was one occasion on which I had to climb through a window here, but that's a long story, and perhaps better left for perhaps a late evening event. And there was another occasion climbing over a wall at the back of a Trinity Ball. But again, we'll perhaps draw a veil over some of those of my escapades. There was, of course, many occasions on which I occupied premises in Trinity and refused to budge from the security offices in Front Square, from accommodation office, and I don't think I'm the only student union activist or former student union activist here who has been engaged in occupations over the years. And of course, one couldn't possibly condone that, but you know, it's all part of the rich fabric of Trinity life. So I started here in '85 as a student, and the dim and distant past. I was very encouraged by the famous phrase that Trinity students crammed 3 years' work into 4 years, and I loved the sound of that. Usually said disparagingly by UCD graduates, by the way, but I thought this was the best thing ever. Imagine 4 years to take 4 years, and I never regretted it. It was a wonderful time to be in the law school. Deeply repressive time in Irish society. Any of you who are old enough like me to remember will know, not only Ireland had just passed the brutal Eighth Amendment, but also, homosexuality was still a criminal offence, contraception was criminalised, divorce was illegal. It was a really, grim time. Unemployment was up to 18-20%. The then Fianna Fáil finance minister was telling us that this island is too small for all of us. You'll all have to emigrate. And all of us went through our college years in the late 80s, with the expectation of emigration. And that casts an enormous shadow over a society. When all of those, the youngest generation are all expecting to emigrate. And that's what Ireland was like in the 80s. And sometimes I feel like when I'm talking about it, it was all monochrome. Of course we had great fun too. There was a great time, But looking back, there were the laws and the policies which were in operation were dreadful. They were dreadful for women, particularly for women. For LGBT people, they were dreadful too. But Trinity was a bastion of liberalism, even then. And the law school, I don't know how many of you here have connections to the law school, but the law school, among our lecturers were Mary Robinson, Mary McAleese, the wonderful Kader Asmal, who went on to become education minister in the first ANC government post-apartheid South Africa. So, we had an amazing array of very political lecturers in the law school, and law and politics were very intertwined. In my final year, I was elected president of the Students' Union. I know we're joined by another former president, Lynn Ruane, and of course Jenny Maguire, who's the incoming president, I think, just elected, and congratulations, Jenny. I was the second woman elected president in the history of the Students' Union. Anya Lawler, because for pub quiz enthusiasts, Anya Lawler was the first. And when I was elected in '89, people said, oh, you students today are nothing like as active as students in the early '80s. Joe Duffy's year, you know, this was the year that we all had to look up to. And I'm always amused now because people say to me now, well, students nowadays, they're nothing like as active as they were in your day. And I say, that's what they used to say to us, that we were inactive. In fact, we were hugely activist. We were active on the fees issue. We were active on student facilities and accommodation. But of course, what we were particularly active on was on abortion rights and abortion information rights. And I was one of 4 Trinity Student Union sabbatical officers, and the 4 of us were taken to court, threatened with prison, and told to pack our bags. We were going to jail because we were giving information to women in crisis pregnancy. And it's been the formative experience of my political career, and that's many decades ago now, was as a 21-year-old lifting the phone in Mandela House, as we then called the Students' Union House, House 6. We were responsible for his release, by the way, by naming our building. No, it's true. We like to think that. But on the phone in Mandela House, lifting the phone, we were the only organisation then openly still offering information on where you could get an abortion in England. And don't forget, my kids don't believe this, there was no internet. There was no other way of getting this information. Women's magazines were censored when they came in from Britain, so the phone numbers of the clinics, the BPAS and Mary Stopes clinics in London and Liverpool, those phone numbers were inaccessible, except the students' unions. And it's hugely proud. I think it's something we need to shout from the rooftops, the proud roles the student movement had in bringing about change on abortion and standing up to the bullies in SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child, standing up to the right, standing up to the Catholic Church, and continuing to provide that information in the face of legal action, in the face of being chased around Front Square by Gardaí, another long story. We did this, and women were ringing us every day from all over Ireland in utter desperation, unable, with pregnancies that they needed to terminate, and that they couldn't find information on how to do that anywhere but the Students' Union. So, luckily for us, we did keep handing out the information. But luckily, a lawyer called Mary Robinson, who you've all probably heard of, stepped in to represent us, and we escaped jail. Not escaped from jail, which would have been a very different story, but we weren't sent to jail. She used very clever legal arguments involving point of European Union law we were bankrupted in the process, but that's, again, another story. So, the students' battle in the late 80s, early 90s for abortion information rights, to me, is one of the proudest moments of the student movement history in Ireland. And it's also a very proud moment for Trinity and for Trinity women. And one thing that really stayed with me in all my subsequent years when I was teaching in the law school for many years, and very proud to be so associated with it, what stuck with me was the incredible loyalty and support from the Trinity community, not just students, but Trinity staff, former graduates, who really rallied, some quietly, some more loudly, to support us. And that feeling on this wonderful campus that we always had great support, that this was a place where you could be a feminist, you could be an out LGBT person at a time when really that was so impossible in so many parts of Ireland, but it was a place where people were accepted and where we saw a really strong spirit of inclusivity. Fast forward now, 2024, when we've not only decriminalised homosexuality and enabled divorce and contraception, but of course we now have wonderfully marriage equality. We have repealed the 8th Amendment. We're in a very different place, and my teenage daughters, one of whom is going to be voting for the first time today, they're growing up in a very different Ireland, not under that awful shadow of the 8th Amendment. Today's International Women's Day, and I'm just going to finish by saying today, as we celebrate that great progress for women, we do still have to remember how much more needs to be done. And Eda talked about unfinished business. We've an unfinished democracy, because if you walk into the Dáil Chamber, as I have the privilege of doing now, I'm elected as a TD for this great constituency, Dublin Bay South, and I hope there's some constituents here, because all politics is local. But if you walk into the Dáil, Mary Harney knows better than anyone, all politics is local. We always remember that. You'll see just how pale male stale it is, because it's still over 3/4 male. Less than 1/4 of our TDs are women. Only 37 of us out of 160. Those of us who are in there tend to be more high profile, so people don't often realise just how bad it is in terms of male domination in the Oireachtas. So our democracy is unfinished. We produced a gender equality report that I chaired last year, where we talked about the unfinished democracy, the unfinished business, all that needs to be done. One small thing we do need to do. Today, we need to vote yes, yes. When we strip away the frustration, and I'm an opposition party leader, the frustration at how government have run the campaign, the critiques of the wording, which I've voiced myself, we have to just ask ourselves, are the two changes we're being asked to make today, do they represent an improvement on the current hideous text that talks about women as having lives in the home and mothers as neglecting duties in the home? Is it better than what we currently have? It is objectively better. Both the family referendum and the care equality referendum. The text we're being offered, not perfect, not ideal, not the text I would have chosen or I recommended, but it's a lot better than the current text, and it does represent a step forward for women. And today, International Women's Day, mana, ta, that's what I'm, sorry, in case you didn't get that, that's what I'm calling for, and that's what I'm campaigning for, and that's why one of the reasons I'm delighted to be here, to celebrate women's progress and note how much more needs to be done before we can achieve a finished democracy and all that unfinished business still to do. Thank you.
Ivana, and we're going to chart, because we've great speakers this morning, so Professor Jane Grimsom is next to the podium.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk to you this morning about some of my personal reflections. I was born in Scotland. My father was an engineer and an academic, and he was appointed to the chair of civil engineering in 1957, so we moved to Ireland. So I guess it's perhaps not surprising that I decided to study engineering, and I was the first girl to graduate from engineering in Trinity in 1970. But interesting to reflect that Trinity was a bit behind the curve, because the first woman to graduate in engineering in Ireland was Alice Perry in 1906 from Galway. So it took us a while to get round to it here in Trinity. I was in a class of 30 guys, and it was great fun, I have to say. I ended up marrying one of them. So I got the pick of the bunch. I then did a master's and a PhD in Toronto and Edinburgh. And I returned to Trinity in 1980 to take up a lectureship in computer science. And I have to say, I worked my way up through the career ladder. I served as Dean of Engineering, as Pro-Dean of Research, and then finishing up as Vice-Provost. And I can honestly say that I didn't find any barriers or difficulties or obstacles to overcome. I was hugely supported by my family and by colleagues like the late Simon Perry and John Byrne, and the former Provost John Hegarty. So huge support and encouragement. And opportunities presented themselves, and I took them. But I gradually came to realize that my experience was not necessarily matched by that of other women in academia and elsewhere. And it's often referred to as the leaky pipeline, where women drop out of careers as you progress up, or hit the glass ceiling and get kind of stuck. And Trinity has made enormous progress in this area in the last couple of decades, particularly. For many years, the percentage of female full professors in Trinity hovered around 10%, 10 to 12% for a long, long time. And that was well below the EU average of about 19%. And that's in spite of the fact that women constituted approximately 50% of the academic staff. By 2013, it had reached 14%, and today it is a whopping 35%. We've still got a long way to go, but that is a huge progress over essentially a decade. And it's interesting that 35% is well above what is often regarded as the tipping point of 30% for bringing about culture change within an organization. And of course, today, after well over 400 years, we finally have a female provost. And college also was awarded an Athena Swan Silver Award last year, and also an EU Sustainable Gender Equality Award, which is a terrific tremendous experience, and everybody involved should be congratulated for that progress. So Trinity has made enormous progress, but it didn't happen overnight. A lot of very talented and committed women over the last 120 years worked away quietly in the background and laid the foundations of where we are today. And I'd like to single out one particularly important milestone, which happened when I was an undergraduate engineering student, namely the election of the first women fellows in 1968. And this is a personal reflection on this, because one of the women who was elected on Trinity Monday 1968 was Professor Barbara Wright, who was my stepmother. And Barbara was the granddaughter of a suffragette, Barbara Hoskins, who actually ended up in jail for, I think, breaking windows in Dublin Castle or something like that. Anyway, as a suffragette, she was very keen to instill in her daughter and her granddaughter passed it on to me, saying, I don't care who you vote for, what you vote for, but you must get out and vote. We fought for you to get the vote, you have to vote. So absolutely, I agree with the urge, vote. Doesn't matter how you vote. I know Ivana would say you have to vote yes, yes. And so would I, but Barbara Hoskins would say, I don't care how you vote as long as you vote. So I want to talk a little bit about gender equality and my involvement in that area. Perhaps not surprising, as a woman engineer, I kind of focused on trying to get more girls interested in studying engineering and STEM more generally. But as my thinking on the subject progressed, I began to worry about whether it was really ethical to encourage girls to pursue a career where I knew that they were going to face barriers and difficulties. There was a very important study that was published about 2014 by the Royal Society in Edinburgh, which showed that if you looked at graduates, STEM graduates, so engineering and science and maths graduates, about a year after graduation, well over 70% of the guys were still in STEM. The women, it was way less than 50%. They were falling out the leaky pipeline, and they analysed the issues. And there were many complicated issues, but one of them certainly was the atmosphere, where they felt that they couldn't flourish. So that study, it was called Tapping All Our Talents, shows what a terrible waste of talent it is when so many people drop out. So I'd like to talk about two initiatives that I was involved in here in Trinity. The first one was the establishment of WISER, Women in Science and Engineering Research, which was set up in 2005 with a grant from Science Foundation Ireland. It was kind of modelled, it was a competitive grant across the universities, and 3 universities were successful, and we were one of them. It was based on a somewhat similar model in the US called the ADVANCE program, which was designed to try and help in or introduce initiatives to help in the recruitment, promotion and retention of women in STEM and academia. So WISER, I think, true, was a small enough project, but it was very successful and started to really raise the profile of women in STEM in Trinity. We organised many different events, and it sort of gradually created a sense of community among the women in STEM, which was really important because many of us were the only woman or one of very few women in the department, so they're very isolated. So this created a sense of community. But I think it's probably true to say that a lot of the initiatives that we focused on could be roughly described, somewhat pejoratively, as fixing the women, to make the women more competitive with the men, to help them, get fellowship, publish, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas we now know it's not about fixing the women, it's about fixing the system. WISER was run by a colleague, Caroline Ruckneen, and then somewhat after a few years, it then enlarged into a new initiative called TC GEL, which was Trinity Centre for Gender Equality and Leadership under Eileen Drew. And Eileen was a really pivotal person in the whole gender equality saga in higher education in Ireland, because she worked very hard at getting the Athena Swan award system in Ireland. It was set up in the UK, and getting it over here. And she was very instrumental in that, and also very instrumental in the successful award at the first 3 schools when Athena Swan started. And then the next stage was that the then Provost, Paddy Prendergast, decided that it would be better if all this equality activity, rather than being sort of out on the periphery, should be mainstreamed and integrated into the Equality Office. And I think that was a good thing, because it guaranteed ongoing funding, but most importantly, it put it right in the centre. It wasn't some kind of nice-to-have activity on the outside. It was something that was really important to Trinity to be a successful research university. And then just finally to say a few words about what I would regard as the most challenging thing that I ever had to do in my career, and that was the chairing the Task Force on Gender Equality in NUI Galway. You may remember that Galway lost an equality case that was taken by Micheline Sheehy Skeffington when she and a number of other women failed to be promoted to senior lectureship, and she won. And the university, in fact, there were shockwaves throughout the whole higher education sector. So it was very, very difficult initially, I have to say, because there was a lot of opposition with people in Galway saying, well, we're a meritocracy, the women aren't simply good enough. Or it's just a matter of time. Women have only been having higher education for about 100 years. They just have to wait. So obviously they're talking about geological time. The equality case was politically motivated. That was another strong argument. And another one which was quite difficult to deal with was that the task force we were just going to, it'll be a whitewash. We were appointed by the governing authority, so we couldn't do anything very sensible. And I also have to say that a lot of the other universities were absolutely hopping mad with Galway for landing everybody in this mess, because the HEA then set up a review of gender equality in higher education, so everybody was impacted by what Galway had done. In our report, which we published in 2016, one of the things that we concluded, we conducted a lot of surveys and focus groups and all sorts of things. Gender inequality is evident across the university, with the result that many women feel undervalued and ignored. And that's a terrible thing to say about a community in a university. But I think one of the things that it made me think about was, what is the evidence? What is the evidence to say why women get stuck in the career? What is the objective evidence of what the blockages are? And therefore, what is the evidence out there that will tell us that these particular initiatives are going to help unblock the system? And so looking at the research literature experience in other universities and so on was very, very important. So all our recommendations in our report were supported by evidence. The most controversial was the introduction of quotas for promotion. And of course, quotas are regarded very negatively by many people, women as well as men. I think one thing that as I say, it was difficult, but we were determined to do it. And we were particularly delighted to see that our recommendation actually found it into the HEA report, which was published a short while later. Just to say a word about the particular type of quota that we recommended. It's called the flexible cascade model, and essentially what it means is if 50% of your lecturers are women, then 50% of those promoted to senior lecturer or associate professor to assistant professor to associate professor should also be women, and so on to full professor. So there's no leaky pipeline. And when you're recruiting, you should be looking at the sort of size of the potential pool that you're looking for. And I think it's a very logical approach. So I think that has been very good. So to conclude, I've learned a huge amount about gender equality. I still know a bit about engineering and computer science, but I've learned a huge amount about gender equality. What works, what doesn't, what it means for individuals, and why it and diversity more generally really matters in a modern research university. Cultural change isn't easy, and my experience over the years has served to confirm what a rector of a Nordic university told me many years ago. Bringing about change in a university is like trying to move a cemetery. You don't get much help from the occupants. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Grimsom. And we're now going to have Mary Harney, President of the Hist.
They say you learn something every day, so Jane, I've never heard that before. Moving universities like moving a cemetery, you don't get much help from the occupants. We can use that in so many ways. It's a great pleasure to be here, and like Ivana, I too would like to urge a yes vote. I have been sitting at home for the last while reading and following the debates, more so than if I was in politics. And it's the first time we're recognising care in the Constitution, and in relation to women it's a huge improvement, and I won't say any more than that. But the important thing, as Jane said, is to vote. I came to Trinity in 1972. It was 2 years after the ban on Catholics attending Trinity had been lifted. I think I would have come anyway, by the way, for a number of reasons. Number one, it was close to where the 68 bus from Newcastle came into Aston Key, and I didn't have to go out to Earlsford Terrace, or to Belfield. But I came here, and people used to say to me, "You're in that bastion of Protestantism. What is it like?" And Trinity was a much smaller place. I think it was 4,500 to 5,000 students, and you certainly knew all the faces. And if anybody was well known, like Dick Spring was a rugby player, we used to say, "There's Dick Spring," and you see him in the buttery. So it was that kind of place. But I got involved in the Hist at the start, and that probably changed my whole life and dictated my career, because as a result of my involvement in the Hist, I got to meet Jack Lynch, and in 1977 he appointed me to the Senate. I was an accidental politician. I would never set out to be a politician. In those years, and when I went into Leinster House in 1976, the women in the Dáil were either widows of former male holders of the office or daughters. So there was Eileen Desmond, whose husband had died and obviously died, and she took his seat. There was Eileen Lemass, the same. There was Maura Gagan Quinn, and so on. And the only other woman in there, in her own right, was Mary Robinson, who was a senator. And I remember thinking, in my early 20s, I'm certainly not going to be here when I'm 40. I thought everybody was ancient in Leinster House. And one man who subsequently became a junior minister said to me, he sat me down to give me what he thought was good advice, and I think he believed it was. He said, "Look, Mary, I've seen more fellas," he said, "talk their way out of this place than ever talk their way in. Keep your mouth shut in here. You never know who you'd upset. In other words, don't speak." And people didn't speak. There were many deputies elected for years that never spoke in the chamber, believe it or not. But in Trinity, I made great friends, and I want to give you a sense of what Trinity was like, because that's what Anya asked me to do. I became very friendly with a guy called Michael Murray. It's no secret that Michael is a gay man, and he confided that in me and a couple of other people when we were in our first year in Trinity. And I used to be worried about him, because he felt he couldn't tell many people, and he felt it would destroy his career. And I'd ring him up from time to time, and I'd meet him, for a drink or a coffee or whatever. And his mother, he told me, he said, "Mary, don't ring the house anymore. There were no mobile phones, clearly." He says, "My mother says, that pushy one, Mary Harney, ringing a man. If you marry her, she'll keep you at the kitchen sink." So I give you a sense. So it wasn't a thing to do for a woman to be ringing a landline looking for a guy. But one thing a woman could do was invite somebody to the Elizabethan garden party. And I invited George Birmingham, who's now president of the appeal court, and we're still great friends, and he invited me to the Trinity Ball. Again, you couldn't invite someone to the Trinity Ball as a woman, you had to wait to be invited. And I remember one year after the Trinity Ball, we were up all night. We went for breakfast to the Hibernian Hotel. There was a B&Coney grill, and the Fine Gael Ordesh was on in Mansion House, and we all wandered in there in our finery. And I was apparently falling asleep, and this man nudged me and he said, "Stand up for your party leader." To which I replied, "He's not the leader of my party." So I might have been a bit of a security threat, but can you imagine the state we were in? But these were the kind of fun things we did. I was looking over in preparation for today at some of the debates we had in the Hist, to give you a sense of what was on our minds. We had one in 1974 that contraception would ruin Irish society, would you believe? And one of the speakers we had was Charlie Flanagan's father, Oliver J., and you can imagine what side he was on. In 1975, we had a debate that two parties would make twice the mess. In other words, it was whether single-party government or coalition. We never envisaged there would be three parties and maybe more. We also had a debate in 75 on Israeli intransigence in the Middle East will lead to a third world war. And we had debates like Irish society should embrace the gay culture and so on. And these were reflecting topics that were on our mind. It was such a conservative place. And the Trinity student shop began to sell condoms, and there was such an outroar nationally about that, both within the college actually, as well as externally. So Trinity was I don't know about a bastion of Protestantism. I never noticed that. There were a lot of Northern students here when I was here, and I actually got to learn a lot about Northern Ireland from my friendships with people from the North, from both communities. You'd often hear them refer to each other as he's a prod or she's a taig. That was a language I wasn't familiar with. But through my friendships, I went to Northern Ireland a lot, met a lot of people there, and I think it influenced my thinking on Northern Ireland when I subsequently went into politics. But it also influenced something else. When you get involved in debating, you get to understand the other's perspective, because sometimes you're on the side that you don't agree with. You're asked to speak on the other side because your name is drawn out of a hat or something, and you have to try and think differently. And it does make you understand another perspective, and it makes you tolerant of other people's views. And I believe, I'm a liberal, I believe the essence of liberalism is appreciating and respecting other people's views, even when you disagree with them. And sometimes people that are very liberal or very conservative don't want to have any rights associated with people that have a different point of view, and they become quite intolerant of difference, and I think that's an error. I was also involved here in the Society for the St Vincent de Paul. We were extremely active in inner city Dublin. Again, my God, did I learn a lot from that and the conditions people were living in, because all of us were kind of cocooned away from the reality of life even then, and the awful circumstances in which some children grew up in, quite honestly, what were ghettos around Bishop Street and all those areas. The first Catholic chaplain was appointed then, a lovely man called Father Brendan Heffernan, and I didn't go to Mass every day even then, but I was kind of used to go for the coffees and stuff and meet some very interesting people like Dermot McCarthy, who became secretary to the government, and his wife. They were students then. And many of my friendships that I have today, my close friends, actually I met them here in Trinity. It was just a fabulous place for growing up. And I had intended on leaving Trinity to become an accountant, actually. I don't think I would have been too successful at that either. And I ended up in Leinster House by complete accident. And that was a privilege. It's a privilege to be in politics, and it's a privilege to be able to not just voice your opinion and have your perspective, but also hopefully to serve in office. And I really do hope that Ivana Bacik, who I think is terrific, I hope that she gets an opportunity to serve in office, because I think she certainly deserves it. And Lynn is of a completely different generation to me, and Lynn, you're a real activist in the Senate, and sometimes I watch some of the people in the Senate, including my former colleague Michael McDougall, who's taken a big interest in the no side, and I see a young woman like you standing up, fearless for what you believe in, and it's terrific. And I can't remember what committee you were on a few weeks ago, and you were just great. You were getting right to the point. And in my experience in politics in particular, women are much more collaborative. They're much more task-orientated. They're not into the politics of a situation, whether it's in formal politics or whether it's in business. Women are much more interested in issues and making things happen. And in my view, much more collaborative in their style of leadership, and much more empathetic too. And that's why I'm such a fan of women in leadership at, the critical mass that Jane spoke about, the 30+%. Until you get to that situation, we have a lot of unfinished business. And I know myself from serving in politics and in government that when you have women around the table, the agenda does change and the perspectives change. And you'd be just amazed at, and I'm gone from politics 11 years, but you would just be amazed at the thinking that some men have in relation to the role of women. Even then, hopefully it's changing, or has changed and is changing, but it will take a generation or more. Because as my friend's mother said, if you marry her, she'll have you at the kitchen sink. And in those days, the men did all the earning, and the women, to a large extent, did all the homemaking and the cleaning, etc., etc. And thankfully that's changed. I see young fathers and, the way they look after their children, and I just love to see that, because I think it's so important. Role models are so important. The Hist had the first woman auditor in 1976. It took the university until 2021 to have the first woman provost. But I was very happy in my position as Chancellor of the University of Limerick to chair the selection board that picked the first woman of any Irish university in 2019, and now we have 7. Imagine, first in 2019 and now 7. And it goes to show you when the door begins to open and somebody assumes that role, they say what you can't see, you can't be. It's amazing how, not so much how easy it becomes, but how normalised it becomes. And on the last occasion, it had to be a woman provost because all the candidates were female. Wasn't that remarkable? And Linda is doing a fantastic job. Anything I come to hear, she's at it. I don't know whether she's ever in her office because she seems to go to all the activities. And Eda was asking her for money for the Golf Society. She has a large cheque book, so if you need any money. And I'll finish with this. There's an interesting story about Eda, whom I hadn't met for years after I was here. My aunt in Manchester was very proud of the fact that I went to Trinity, and she used to tell, she was a bit of a snob, she used to say to people, it's the same as Oxford and Cambridge. And she ran what she called a hotel called Shaw's Hotel. It was actually a B&B, but she called it a hotel. And Eda was one of her, she was Eda's landlady for quite a few years in Manchester.
She taught me how to make an apple cake.
She taught her how to make an apple cake. I don't think she ever taught me how to make an apple cake. There you are. But when she'd come to Ireland and I was in Trinity, she'd always take me to the Burney Inn, which was a very posh place, because other than the Burney Inn with her, it was Captain America's about twice a year, was our big night out. And believe it or not, for the first time since I left Trinity, I was there this week in Captain America's, and it hasn't changed at all. I was amazed. Still the big burgers, the chili con carne burger, oh my God, I loved it. But so well done to the Hist. I'm delighted now to be the president of the Hist. When I was persuaded to allow my name go forward by David McConnell, he didn't tell me about the small print of all the activities you're supposed to attend. But we have a great auditor, and I think we've had 11 women auditors. Is that right? 14, even better. The first was in 76, and we've had 13 since, and that's terrific. So, ladies, on International Women's Day, no barriers, go for it, whatever you want, make it happen, and you have to go for that election. This lady's thinking about the local elections. Go for it. You won't regret it. And whatever it is in life you do, and wherever you work, whether it's in business, it's in the university, this is a great place to educate yourself. And it's not what you learn at the lectures, because I don't think anyone ever remembers much of that. I was delighted to hear Jane say that. It's the friends you meet, it's the societies you get involved in, it's the opinions that you form as a result of the experiences. They're the things that last, and the friendships, and we should never take any of them for granted.
Thanks so much. So I think with time, I think Provost is going to say a few words and introduce the film.
Yeah,
Provost,
I'll say a few words and then I'll introduce that.
Yeah, lovely.
Oh, we're grand. So, hello everybody. I think I need to clear up a few things. So first of all, I am in my office sometimes. I don't have a big checkbook in my back pocket just in case there's a queue, but I do agree with the cemetery comment. So, it is really fantastic to be here and just to be able to give some reflections. And one of the key reflection I would make is that I'm constantly proud of Trinity. When I hear all of the people speaking here and all of they've achieved for Trinity, when I look in the audience and I see colleagues from HR, when I see our people in our EDI team, when I see staff from all areas of Trinity, as well as our wonderful students, and when I look at all of the fantastic things the Hist are doing, I just think there is a huge amount to be proud of. I suppose want to say maybe a couple of things. So I suppose we all end up where we are because at times people do things that help us along the way. And actually, one of the people that I often refer to that helped me along the way would be Jane Grimsom here. And she might remember another acronym. So I'm an engineer myself. So we had a group called FEW. It's Faculty of Engineering Women because there were so few in it. But Jane had a very pivotal part in my life. Actually pushed me forward in a way, and I think this is a really, really important point for women. So there was a there was an interview competition in Trinity for a chair position, and I actually was going to be on the interview panel, because you know on interview panels here, for students who don't know, there's a kind of a range of people on it. There would be more junior and more senior people in the mix. And Jane actually tapped me on the shoulder and said, "What are you doing on this interview panel? You should be applying for the job." And if she hadn't actually said that to me at that point in time, I probably wouldn't have moved on and been in a position where I eventually had a personal chair, and then was, you know, felt like eligible and I could put my hat in the ring for Provost. So you can actually congratulate Jane or blame Jane that I'm in the current role that I am. But it speaks to a really important point, that that person doing something at a specific time in your life, it can be one thing and it can change everything. And Jane, I've said this to you before, but that is actually such a pivotal moment for me, apart from the fact you're being a great role model in general. I just want to reflect a little bit as well about the role of provostship. It is, like, so I have never been the first at anything in my life, except I was trying to remember, I think maybe when I was in what we used to call in Cork the Briginis, which are kind of like brownies, I won a cup for something once. But the first time I ever was the first in something was being the first woman provost in Trinity. And I have to say it was the proudest day of my life. It was interesting, actually, that there were 3 women in the race only. You could feel the shift in Trinity. There was kind of, in one sense, I think it would have been very hard for a man to put their name in the ring at the time. But what was most useful about it is that it got women out of the debate while keeping it in the debate, if you know what I mean. So we didn't have to spend the whole election talking about women, but at the same time it was right in front of you. And to me, that was kind of a very freeing thing as well. And I've been kind of thinking, you know, I had a group of school kids, actually from my own school in Cork, were here about a year and a half ago from Toker School. And one of the kids said to me, and I thought it was really, she was about 10, and she said, "Is it more important to you you're provost or you're a woman provost?" And I thought it was a very interesting question to be asked. And in one way, of course, it was really important, because I think it's important that you push something forward. And I remember in the day of the election, somebody telling me the story. They were on their way home in the Lewis, and they heard this woman talking to their daughter, who looked about 6 or 7, explaining there was now a woman provost in Trinity, which I was amazed they'd even paid attention to. But so it does matter. But on the other hand, now I do feel it doesn't matter at all in a different way. And I've been reflecting on this, and I would say that there is nowhere I go now in terms of, I suppose, the duties I have and the work that I have to do, that anyone pays any attention to it in what I would consider a positive way. It just is. But then when you step back from that, I also do realise that I'm in a bubble to a certain extent, a bubble of that acceptance. And I think that bubble of that acceptance is partly due to all of the work that people have done here, because Trinity has moved on, and I don't think people think anymore, it just is. But I think there are 2 really key important points. I think, first of all, you can never assume it'll always be just is. And one of the things that you see in the past, you see people make step forwards, and then they say, okay, the woman provost thing is done, we can go back to the way we were doing things, or the such and such a thing is done. So I think there's always a pressure to do that. But then I think in the wider world, and in Trinity too, there's immense structural inequality that's bedded deeply in the world around us. So I would describe myself now, you couldn't not describe me now as middle class. I didn't come from that background initially, but it still remains completely hard for people to get out of a certain background. It's very difficult for people of certain ethnicities and backgrounds to, if you look at academia, for example, academia is completely biased towards white people. It's biased right down to the level, if you look at who gets cited, you know, in publications and things, it's so structurally embedded in it, there's an enormous bias. So for me, there's a huge amount to do in that context. And when you look at places, when you look at, you know, countries like the US, which is very alarming in many ways, and you think that somebody who actually sexually harasses women and behaves the way he was president and could be president again, you know, when you look at climate change, when you look at climate injustice and how it disproportionately affects women, I think that no matter how proud I am of advances that are made in Trinity, no matter how much I recognise that we have more to do, there's more to do still in the world around us. And I think that's why I think when I look at people here, I think, and look at all of you, I think, isn't it great that we have people who study these things, who stand up for these things, and who speak out. So then just the final thing to say, I think all the time as well, I find myself kind of constantly questioning how we go about talking about these things. I'll just throw this out there. I mean, I was wondering myself, like International Women's Day to a certain extent is slightly, there's not as much happening in some ways which I think is a good thing, and in some ways which I think is a bad thing. And I have to kind of, I struggle between those two things. When I look at things about women in STEM, for example, sometimes people ask me to speak as a woman in STEM, and apart from the fact I've forgotten all my engineering in the few years that I've been taken up with this, I kind of don't think there's an option for not being a woman in STEM, because I don't think you need to, I think every one of us needs to be technically literate, because the power in this world is in the kind of invisible digital forces, and unless you can speak up against it, or speak up about it, or get involved in those conversations, you can't really dictate what's going to happen to us. So I think there is no option, irrespective of what background you come from. So I think like that. And I think things like, for example, and they make me question what do we talk about when we talk about including people. I think about things like when I went to do engineering first, I remember my mum saying, like, no, she didn't know what it was. So she went, oh, that's lovely, and didn't have any kind of biased opinions on it, or no, I don't think I even knew that more men did it than women. And I think about, is there something that we're doing by over-labeling things that kind of pushes things into a particular direction, and how can you free yourself up? And maybe that was a stupid naivety, but you kind of wonder about where the conversation is going and how we can unlock things and where we can go. And then I also recognise, and we see it here as well with access, we see, for example, while we try to work really hard to open the doors of the university and include people from wide backgrounds, we know ourselves that, for example, there are certain disciplines that it's harder. So, for example, that's why we've pathways to business and pathways to law, so we make sure that, like, all professions open up. But we also see, once you get out of college the other end, that the same thing happens all over again, and that when people get into firms and get into different companies, that people from particular backgrounds tend to succeed more. So I suppose I sit here in celebration of all that Trinity has done. I recognise that despite all Trinity has done, there is a huge amount more to do. I think in the wider world, we have significant problem with significant steps backwards when you look at the world as a whole. As I said, when you think structurally, when you think of climate change, when you think of all of these things, there's a significant step backwards, and there's a job on us to do even more. And I suppose I question myself all of the time about what's the best way to have these kind of discussions and debates, and therefore I'm very grateful that the Hist is the kind of place where they're not afraid to talk about all of the topics we need to talk about, and talk about those in different and nuanced ways. So with that, there's a video that has been created by Circa Ball. Circa is coming up here now, and Catherine O'Mahony they both did great work. Okay. Oh, that's okay. Very nice. And this speaks to a really particular point. Apart from the fact I sound like a robot on the video and everyone else sounds naturally chatty. I see Mary there, one of the stars, and Peggy from the video. I think one of the things that we do often in Trinity, and you'll see this come out in the video, we talk about the first women in Trinity being in 1904, and of course that were the first academics, and there's been people working in Trinity, as you will see with this, for a long, long time. And we talk about inclusivity, and we talk about a lot of things, and we don't ever think about the full population in Trinity. So for me, this is very, very much about recognising that. I'm delighted that, Circa, you came up with the idea of doing this, and it's a celebration of all of those people who've worked in Trinity and contributed to Trinity in so many different ways, which oftentimes, when we give these dates, that it doesn't encompass all of that. So over to you guys to play the video.
Trinity is a complex organisation, and there's a collective weave of labour that makes Trinity work. And on this International Women's Day, I want to celebrate all of the women in all of the roles, past and present, that makes Trinity what it is.
In 1637, the college got its new statutes from Archbishop Laud, and what the statutes tell us is that there were to be a cook, a caterer, a butler, and a porter. The statutes only envisaged men, but the college actually went on to interpret that as a permissive document, and then in due course it recruited a kitchen maid in 1736 and a hall maid by the early 1750s.
College in March 1996. Even though I'm from Dublin City, I never come in under the front arch, so I was always expected to be taught to leave. Everybody worked very hard working. The housekeeper, it really was a hard job when I started. But I loved it because the women I worked with, I was only here about 4 or 5 weeks, and I found myself on the straight line outside pastry, fighting for a part-time pension this time.
There was 2 parts to where equality came that was told. One was for equal pay and the other was for addition into the pension for part-time workers. You could have a housekeeper in here for 20, 30 years and they never implemented. All women, nearly all part-time.
They were single parents and, they were carers.
It was nurses' pensions, they didn't have to be full-time parent. So that disputed the guts of 200 women walking across patron, housekeeping and secretariat.
When we had been awarded the equal pay, the pension issue was still outstanding.
So Mary Harney was up the river on the 6th floor of the art building. So we hatched this plan, oh, Mary Harney's coming in, what do we do? Let's big crash down. Yes, we could. We got these t-shirts printed say, where's our pension? We won't name the person who slips us in, threw off our coats, we want our pensions. But fair play to Mary Harney, like.
She was great, so she did actually see the point that we were trying to make, but the following week, I think, I got a letter from Shop Stewart shouldn't be on the premises after the time he actually nominated him.
We were in the middle of it, we were in the thick of it. We believe the men had a vice-chancellor. Now, bear in mind, legislation from Europe didn't come in until 2001. We were 5-6 years ahead of Europe on this, I'm thinking. We gave women 7 years extra pension there, so we would never have that.
Just to say quickly, it was really amazing to hear all those wonderful contributions, both in the video and from all the speakers. And thank you so much to all of the trailblazing women on both the panels there, and for all their contributions. I think myself and every other woman in Trinity today has a lot to be grateful to you for. So thank you so much to all of them, and to Lynn for her chairing. While I have the chance, while I have you all here, I would also like to give a quick thank you to Angela and Trinity Women graduates, to Catherine and Saoirse and everyone else at Trinity Comms, to the Senior Dean, Ona Sullivan, to the Provost and her team as well, to Ursula Quill and everyone on his committee, for all of their help in organising today's events. And we will take a break now for a few minutes, and then we'll be back here at 1 o'clock for our second panel, which is looking forward to the next 120 years of women in Trinity College, with Senator Lynn Ruane, with Jenny Maguire, President-elect, with Mary Lee, who we just saw in the video, and with Dr. Ronica Chakrabarty. So I hope I will see you all then. Thank you so much.
Everyone, I think we're going to start. So you're all very welcome to our second panel at the symposium today. My name, I forgot to introduce myself at the first one, which is typical, my name's Lynn Scarf. I am a graduate of Trinity and I am Director of the National Museum of Ireland. I'm delighted to be here this morning in the role of chair. So we had fantastic speakers earlier on share their experiences, and in many ways, actually I just had a short conversation with Renika, and she said she was just saying that she's recently spent some time with some elders on a particular journey, and just that sometimes it's really good to listen And I thought, and actually reflecting on our panel this morning, I think many of us in the room really enjoyed the opportunity to just actually listen and hear people's experiences, including one of our speakers now, Mary and Peggy, on the film, which was just really fantastic as well. So we'll get a chance, I think, and an opportunity in this symposium for a bit of a conversation, and in many ways that makes sense. We're moving now, having had reflections on contributions of women to Trinity since 1904. We're now saying what's next, really. We're looking forward to the next 120 years of women in Trinity College. Our speakers for this session are Mary Leahy, who you've just seen on the video, who's Head of Employee Relations. Then we have Jenny Maguire, who is the Student Union President-elect. We have then, that's going to be followed by Dr. Renika Chakrabarty, and who's Associate Professor in the Business School. And then Senator Lynn Ruane is going to be our last speaker, and then we'll have some moments to sum up and a conversation. So I'm not going to hold the podium for much longer. Mary is going to be our first speaker, so I'll welcome her up.
Thanks, Lynn. Before I start, I want to make a couple of clarifications. When Peggy and I done our interview with Sorka a couple of weeks ago, we had no idea that Mary Harney was going to be here. It was by pure accident that we spoke nice about her, okay? And also, Mary Harney didn't run out of the room because the video was coming up where she was going to be mentioned. She did have a prior engagement that had been already in place. Look, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invite. I'm delighted to be here. Look, I'm going to get into it and not delay, because I think it would be good if we could have a Q&A session on this one, talking about the future. So today, as we gather to reflect upon and celebrate the status and role of women within our community and beyond, we stand at an important moment in history. On the 4th of February this year, there were 4 new statues of influential women installed in our library, marking the first time that statues of women have appeared in our historic long room. Honouring these 4 remarkable women not only marks a significant step towards better representation in our public spaces, but also serves as a powerful reminder of the contributions women have made and continue to make to society, to academia, and to the world at large. The recognition of Mary Wollstonecraft, Ada Lovelace, Augusta Gregory, and Rosalind Franklin among the 40 marble statues is more than a gesture of acknowledgement. It's a declaration of our commitment to gender equality and a celebration of diversity in all its forms. These women, pioneers in their respective fields, embody the spirit of innovation, resilience, and the quest for knowledge that defines our university. However, while we celebrate these achievements, we must also confront the ongoing challenge of gender inequality, stereotypes, and underrepresentation. While we recognise the strides we've made towards gender equality, yet it is crucial to acknowledge that our journey is far from over. It is also crucial to acknowledge that it's been a long, long journey to get to where we are today. The talk about gender equality has been around for far too long. Therefore, before we talk about the future, I need to go back into the past a little bit. In the 1970s, when the gender pay gap was reported to be circa 40%, the Anti-Discrimination Pay Act was introduced in 1974, the first piece of Irish employment law to provide for an entitlement of equal pay. Great, we'd be all sorted, so we thought. However, move on nearly 20 years to the 1990s. The gender pay gap has reduced somewhat to around 29–30%. Move on to another 30 years to this decade, and in 2022, the average gender pay gap in Ireland was 9.6%. So while there's been some movement, it's not enough. The only improvement we should accept is when there's no pay gap. In the workplace and in the home, gender stereotypes persist, often dictating the roles and expectations placed upon individuals based on their gender. This not only hampers personal freedom, but also limits the diversity of perspectives and creativity in problem solving and innovation. As we look to the future, it is clear that women will continue to play a key role in shaping the academic world and beyond. The leadership of women in universities is not just about representation, but also about the rich perspectives and ideas we bring to the table. Our goal must be to foster an inclusive environment that not only recognises but actively supports the varied contribution of all our members of the community. We must challenge stereotypes, we must dismantle barriers, and we must create opportunities for all individuals, regardless of gender, to realise our full potential. For ourselves here in Trinity, I say, maybe look at trying to make a level playing field for us out there. We need to encourage women into all aspects of study and work. We not only need to attract women, we need to also retain them. It is a very competitive employment market out there that we're experiencing at the moment. And Trinity could do its bit by something, I see, as simple as introducing progressive policies to cover women's issues such as fertility, miscarriage and menopause. The journey towards gender equality and inclusivity is ongoing. It is up to us, as members of the Trinity community and the broader academic world, to continue this crucial conversation. As we strive for a more inclusive future, the role of women in leadership becomes even more critical. Our voices and our experiences can guide policies and practices that benefit not only women, but all members of our community. To wrap up, I just want to give a shout out to all my fellow women workers across every role and grade here in Trinity College. There are many other women in leadership roles in this college, in particular the professional service, who could have stood here today to talk to you as I did. I ask that the next time we look to bring women together, to talk about the part that we will all play in making this a great place to study and work, that we look to all our women leaders across the whole college to ensure a balanced representation. Today is for all of you. Gura Margaret.
Thank you, Mary. And Jenny McGuire is going to run next. Jenny.
First, I'd like another round of applause for Mary. I thought it was a fantastic speech. Fabulous. Fabulous. It was 25. So my name is Jenny McGuire. I'm the president-elect of TCD-SU, and I barely got into Trinity. I grew up in Artane, had quite a turbulent childhood. I experienced domestic violence, I had housing insecurity, and worst of all, I shared a room with my twin brother. I went to a DESH school, so I applied to the HERE scheme to get into Trinity, and on post lost my letter. I know. And so I had to get in like everyone else, which of course, as you can see standing here today, I did, by 2 points. This was during COVID, where we had predicted grades, and so because of the poor school I went to, poor in terms of the economic background, is a fantastic school. The historic grades of my school meant I was brought down 2 or 3 grades in what the teachers predicted, and I'm over it. From these experiences, I've learned that systems within education do not work for everyone, or to rephrase, they work exactly for the people they are meant to. We strive to introduce measures, schemes, funds, but the foundation for which these inclusivity measures we put in lie are rife with cracks for students to fall through. They're not meant to support every student the same. And so people like me fall through the cracks in places like this. And it doesn't have to be this way. Through acknowledging our failings, we are allowed the chance to make anew. Less than 2 years ago, the Secretary's office of this college discouraged the hanging of pride flags, as it would be at odds with the heritage status of the buildings. To a young queer woman and student in this college, this hurt. Was my experience at odds with the heritage status of the university I fought so hard to get into? However, our provost was swift and made a firm statement against this, declaring unapologetically that LGBTQI rights are human rights and that we will always fight for them in this increasingly polarized world. College flew the pride flag over TCD for the first time shortly after. cementing its commitment to its queer students and recognizing its role within the broader historical fight for LGBT rights and standing up for the oppressed and vulnerable unconditionally. These acts, though they seem perhaps minor, speak to the progress this university must continue to make going forward, even if it is difficult, especially when it comes to topics that make us tense, uncomfortable, because much like my existence as a transgender woman, it is that tenseness that allows hatred, erasure, and violence to thrive within acts of silence. We must be firm with what we stand for, or risk exposing that we stand for nothing at all. It is because of this I have to mention the following. This college has ties to 13 Israeli institutions. This college is investing in UN blacklisted Israeli firms. This college has chosen to say nothing, while staff and students have begged for action or even just a response. Do you feel tense? Am I suddenly too hostile? Good. When we sit in a room like this, or stand looking beautifully, and reflect upon the wrongdoings of the past, we would be naive to not recognizing the wrongdoings we continue to commit. We are here to discuss women's fights and struggles within this university. It would be an act of whitewashing to not mention that 70% of civilians killed in Gaza are women and children. TCD has allocated €755,000 for projects with Tel Aviv University, who are deeply involved with the IDF. College has said it is a minor investment in its investment portfolio. Yet it is my belief that if even a fraction of what we do results in conditions where C-sections are occurring without anesthetic, where women are left without access to pads or tampons, where there has been a 300% increase in miscarriages, then it is not minor. It is an atrocity. Hatred, erasure, and violence thrives on silence. They rely on that tenseness to reach up from your chest and grab your mouth and shut it closed. It is a deliberate act, not a passive moment of abstention. This college hasn't been neutral on Palestinian genocide. In its silence, investments, and partnerships with Israel, it has sent a message whether it wants to or not. It has emphasized the grief felt by students and staff seeing this violence unfurl, whether they themselves are Palestinian or not. Staff on precarious contracts, the majority of whom are women, are afraid to say anything in fear of losing their job, all in the name of academic freedom. But I must ask, who is this freedom for? Is protecting all peoples once again at odds with the heritage status of our buildings? We can and must do better. I'm not trying to call anyone out. I know I seem quite aggressive. I'm very passionate. I'm trying to call people in, to recognize that we cannot and we should not continue business as usual. We cannot keep ignoring the cries. We must build a college that we can look back on in 120 years' time and be proud of the Trinity that we continue to make. I know we must. A Trinity that works for all of us, both inside and outside of its walls of this campus, where no one can fall through the cracks. But we must first recognize that those cracks exist, deliberate or not. Ní sirsha go sirsha naman, gach man, gur mila malgwev gachtina.
Thank you, Jenny. And we're going to follow with Dr. Ivana Sagarra. Thank you.
So I had the privilege in September of last year to spend time in South Dakota and live with a Native American chief. He was called Chief Black-Spotted Horse. And during my time there, I learned a valuable lesson. And that lesson was about empathic listening. The chief communicates through stories. And so I'd like to start with a story too. So as a professor, I have the honor to be involved in recruitment days, open days, to speak to applicants who wish to come to Trinity. I was at one such event, and a young lady came up to me, and she said, "I didn't know that people who looked like us actually work at university." And I was quite startled, and I looked at her, and I said, "Thank you for sharing that with me." And she actually gave me a hug, and I said to her, "Yes, people like us, people who look like us do work at universities, and soon you'll be here. I look forward to seeing you in September and to see how your journey progresses." So what did that moment do for me? It made me reflect on how important it is to see people, to see yourself. Because how can we ascribe to a reality or a horizon or a vision if we don't know we exist in it? And as part of that, it made me reflect on the fact that over 22 years ago, I visited Trinity, and my pal took a picture of me just outside the Book of Kells. And can you believe it? That picture was in my parents' house, in my bedroom. It was up there for 22 years. So in a strange way, I saw myself here, and somehow it came into reality. It also made me think about the importance of having role models. When I grew up in England. My parents are originally from India, from Calcutta. They moved to Ireland in the 1970s. They lived in Dublin, pre-kids, had a great time, okay? And then they moved to England and I was born. But I never saw anyone who looked like me in the media, in the press, growing up. There was no role model as such. So reflecting on that, coming to Trinity, you're afforded with beautiful opportunities. We're thinking about the future, aren't we? And one such opportunity was to join the Aurora Women in Leadership. And during that journey, I got to meet wonderful professional colleagues, fellow academics, and I learned about leadership. And I learned that if you want to become a role model, you need to see yourself as a leader. And often we ascribe leadership as something that belongs outside of us. It's not us, but it is us. All of us were led here today. You led yourself here. You are a leader. And I think it's very important for future leaders, such as yourselves, leaders who are wonderful, inspiring leaders in the room here today, to understand that we do need to create safe places where we can connect and we can show what leadership values are. And drawing on this, I also wanted to talk about the fact that being in Aurora helped me to see myself as a leader in a humble way, to say, I'm hoping to carve out a space of leadership, whatever that may be. It could be an empathic conversation with a student. It could be that smile that you share. But all of that matters. And as part of that journey at Trinity, I've also been very privileged to be part of the Race and Ethnic Equality Working Group. My dear colleagues are here in the room, Rain, Siobhan. And this particular working group, again, is all about the future. It's about us putting forward a race action plan at college that acknowledges that there's marginalized groups, racialized aspects that need to be considered. We have the traveler community. We need to take a more intersectional lens and understanding how we're all connected and what that means for our realities moving forward. We need to engender safe places such as this to talk, to share, to be seen. I also want to finish with another story, if I may. So, I work in the business school. That might scare some of you. Actually, it kind of freaks me out a bit too. And I'm very grateful that when I got hired, I told them that I'm not really interested in big business. I'm interested in the one-woman band who works creating an indigenous business in Ireland, or the Maasai woman in Arusha, or this wonderful Indian woman I met in the Sundarbans. How can you create business markets that represent them? And it's part of my journey as an academic. I was in Arusha, Tanzania, studying Maasai women and looking at ways to create marketplaces for their jewelry and their artifacts. They're beautiful artisans. And I visited a Maasai Doma in Arusha, and I met these children, okay? And these children came up to me, and they were saying this word, Inanna, Inanna. So I asked Mohammed, our translator, Mo, what's Inanna? And then Mo said, it means I see you. And so I decided to create this mug, and this is an inspirational mug for me, because what does it represent in the back? It represents this notion of seeing each other. And I think with the future, and at Trinity we have opportunities to not only see each other, but to hear each other and to understand each other. So with that I conclude, and I say to you all, Inanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renika. And finally, Senator Lynn Ruan. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Jenny for her words. I think I came here with a very low heart today on International Women's Day. Usually it's only for when I'm thinking about working class women and women who are on the margins, but today was very, very difficult thinking about women and thinking of the women of Gaza and Sudan and beyond. And it's very hard sometimes to, you want to celebrate all the wins that happen for everyone across all sectors of society. But when nothing has changed for a certain section of society, it's really difficult to do that because you want to champion all women. But for me, it is very difficult, and I listen to the policy changes and I listen to that and I'm kind of thinking like, they're all so important things, so why don't they feel like they matter when I'm at home in Kilnarden? Why don't they feel like they matter? And then I try and think of, well, what does intersectionality really mean? And I don't think it includes those who experience extreme poverty or those who have very low levels of educational attainment. I think intersectionality is failing massively, and I think it's failing because it has focused on the things that women can share in common when they can see it, when they can recognise each other as having a similar struggle, whether that be labour rights, whether that be abortion rights, whether that be access for those with a disability who are still on the margins in many ways in terms of experiencing poverty and lack of unemployment. But a lot of these things that we are advancing in the world can be experienced by middle-class women, upper-class women, professional women. And it's in those connections that them intersectionalities are happening, and they're not necessarily happening for those who are the furthest away from those systems, because the experiences are unique there. They don't cross over into the professional class, the middle class, or, you know. So for me, I feel like the future really needs to begin to understand what class means, what the experience of social class means. And I think the referendum has pointed out some of it to me, because what I'm watching is conversations happening. I'm watching single mothers, working class mothers, mothers with low levels of educational attainment, advocating against themselves, advocating to not change the definition of family within the Constitution. And what I'm watching is mainstream politics not actually doing enough to actually give information as to what that really means. So we've had huge, very important conversations on care, but I can tell you in communities like mine, women think their children's allowance is going to be gone, they think their one-parent family payment is going to be gone by changing definitions. And the fact that the Constitution never recognised them in the first place, and they still think that one-parent family payment is somehow connected to the Constitution. And mainstream campaigns, mainstream feminism, the organisations have not actually gone out to them communities to explain what is accurate information, how it will impact them and how it won't impact them. All they're hearing is, I suppose, sound bites and memes, and, you know, hate and fear is much easier to cultivate than compassion, understanding and critical thinking. And because that takes time, it's not happening. And then there's a vacuum there for false information, because that is being fed and that is then put into a system that people can understand, and it's playing on fears. And I think there's been huge failures in this campaign in terms of recognising working class. And when I say working class, it's such an umbrella term, because in working class communities we all live, you know, on top of each other, and, you know, whether we're in blocks of flats or in housing estates, but experiences can be very different per household in terms of what that actually means. You could grow up in a house where your parents worked, your grandparents worked, or you could grow up in a house where there's intergenerational unemployment and lack of education. So when I use that term, I use it in its broadest sense. And I suppose when I think then of inclusion, and I think of the theme of this year's International Women's Day that you see online, and it's like inspiring inclusion, is kind of the phrase I've seen going around. And I think I used to stand for that. I used to go, yeah, inclusion. We all need to be included. And then I'm kind of looking now and I'm kind of going, geez, that was really naive, because we're looking to be included in a system that wasn't built by us, for us, about us, or to understand us. So this effort to be included in what? In a system that we didn't actually create, or that we don't understand, or we don't know how to navigate. I mean, I see it in Leinster House. If I get in any way exercised about something, you know, it's like they're only short of jumping under the chair. You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's like my accent invokes some sort of fearful experience for people. And you can see it, you know, and you can see and I'm kind of like, what's going on? Like, I'm not even saying anything. But if you wear a suit, or if you have a certain tone to your voice, you can be as cruel as you like, and no one bats an eyelid. Nobody bats an eyelid. You can introduce legislation that is harmful, but as long as you're polite about it, nobody will challenge it in the room. During the debates on the referendums, for example, when they were first coming in relation to the Shannon floor, one senator actually sat there and said, and I'm using my language now to break down what he tried to use in flowery language to kind of not like, so it's like why nobody noticed what he said, only me. And he basically said, to vote yes on changing the family in the Constitution is a disservice to disadvantaged communities, because the reduction of marriage is why we have criminality. And I'm sitting here and I'm going, is no one else hearing this? Has nobody else heard this? Nobody moves. But yet if there is racial tones to anything, if there is homophobic tones, there's a greater understanding, so you'll get more people challenge it. But nobody is experiencing what I'm hearing. And it's that basically what I hear is single mothers are raising criminals. It's basically what it is. And it's a misuse of research, actually. So I'm glad that I already knew all the research and was able to come back in and actually say it's actually poverty that increases the levels of criminality. It's actually poverty. Right? Now, women living in poverty may happen to also not be married, but that's not the cause of the criminality. It's the lack of support and recognition for single mother households, for one parent households, in terms of housing. So if we really want to talk about intersectionality and what the future looks like, not only in terms of Trinity, but what Trinity even needs to focus on, because you have to remember, I was listening to Mary Harney say that like when she came to college, it was like the bastion of, like in terms of precedence. And then I was like, well, what was it for me? And I was like, it was power. I looked at Trinity and I seen a concentration of power. It didn't matter if you were a woman, a man, it didn't matter, it was a concentration of power. And a place that produces people that work in society, whether that be in the courts, whether that be in your hospitals, whether that be in your schools. So what happens in Trinity ripples out so far across society. Right, so I'm like, the power is there and it's rippling out all over there. So for me, it's like, well, where is the concentration of power? So I'll go to Trinity because that's where it is, right? And I remember my my socialist pals and my community worker pals were like, don't go to Trinity, you need to go to Mood, it's where the socialists are. Yeah. And I was like, no, I'm going to Trinity because I need to understand the language, the systems, the everything. And I don't regret that. And Vincent Brown often refers to me as Trinity College's social conscience.
and I'm all right with that, because I think what's really special about my relationship with Trinity is people in Trinity vote me in, and then they never ask me for a thing, right? I'm not getting contacted that this needs to happen, and why is that? And it's because actually they're doing all right. So what they recognise is that whatever it is that I stand for, it's not here. And I was listening to them, Ivana, say all politics is local politics. And I'm like, well, actually, for me, it's not. And I'm extremely local for me in terms of if I was a Tallaght politician. But my electorate is the most elite and powerful electorate constituency in the country. And I don't do anything for them. Right? But I'm saying that because I'm saying they recognise that whatever it is that I stand for is something that's missing. It's a voice that's missing. And it means then that the things that I work on are led by the things that I care about, rather than people putting pressure on me to do a particular thing at a particular time, or you need to vote like this, or you need to introduce that policy. So Trinity, being my electorate, gives me the greatest freedom of all. But it also means that I have to continue to keep pushing Trinity to focus on other issues that matter to women. So this week, all my talks were based with women who experience homelessness, addiction. It's what I do most years. I mostly spend International Women's Days in community projects doing different things like that. And for women, we talk about leadership. Of course, women in all walks of life can be leaders, but that's not necessarily the priority for people right now. You know, there's women raising their children in hotel rooms, and I think we've maybe moved towards some weird acceptance of that, as if the institutions are gone. We have literally created the institutions on our streets. We have created the institutions in the hotels across the roads. We are looking at institutions where families are being stifled, and literally kids' experiences of just walking to school with your pal is gone. Your sleepover with your pal is gone. You know, just knocking into your friend, you know, to go to shop with you is gone. All those things are gone. There's women in addiction who get absolutely, like I'm going to an event tonight where a woman is talking about the impact of menopause on recovery. It's like, oh God, I'm not hearing anyone talking about that. That's actually a really important thing to actually think about in terms of women in recovery from addiction. So for me, when we think about feminism and we think about intersectionality, it can't only be gender pay gaps. And they're all important. They all need to continue on. But we need to look at the other stuff. We need to look at the safety of having a home. We need to look at women getting accurate information. We need to look at women in prison. We need to look at the fact that there's so many women who, in any given day, all they want to do is to be able to advocate for themselves with a doctor, with a teacher. You know, there's a level that we have to come down to, and that's not to lower aspirations, that all of them women can't be a million different things, but you have to have your basic needs met to be able to even have a foundation to stand on to engage in the rest of the things that we all care about and that we're all working towards. So for me, the future of Trinity is looking at that concentration of power and figuring out a way that there's actually real research, insight, development around the ending of poverty. Because poverty is at the basis of so many different things, and that means we need to stop looking to be included in systems that uphold poverty systems. And we need to actually challenge the systems, undo the systems, and co-create them with all of society. But we're not. We're allowing those in power say that this is the system, and we're going to let a few of you in every now and again. And that's not good enough, because it needs to be completely dismantled, rebuilt, co-designed. And the group I was with the other week, we were talking about when you go into, even into community style stuff, and they talk about, well, there's no point creating the wheel, there's no point creating the wheel. And I'm like, we didn't fucking make that wheel. Like, do you know what I mean? We didn't make that wheel and decide what was on it and what was good and what wasn't good. And it's like, can we not just get a new wheel? Can we get a new wheel and figure out how we all fit in there together and what systems that we need to actually work together? So for me, and I'll finish on this, is that we need to look at inclusion, diversity, and understand that we are failing in leaving absolutely thousands and thousands of women who are on the fringes of society. And them women, do you know what, will fight against you. They're angry, they're annoyed, they'll fall for the messaging that we're all fighting against. and you need to not judge them for it, and you need to keep giving an alternative voice, an alternative result, an alternative way to be. And we're not. We're literally handing people over to an old Ireland. We're handing our working class young men over to an old Ireland and an old view because we think that they all think those things. But that all comes from a failure on the state to make people feel that they're living in a, like I think it was Ivana that said, an unfinished democracy. It's unfinished for some, but it hasn't even begun for many. And that's the problem. And until we can stretch right out into all areas of life, well, then we're going to keep failing, and we're going to have to keep trying to pull those rights back instead of being able to actually introduce rights for all women in society, regardless of whether we can fully understand their experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We have some time now for conversation. If that's okay, I'm going to sit up here because So, thank you all for your contributions, and I suppose to start, and if there's kind of questions as well from the audience, but I suppose one of the things that I think is coming through really strongly in terms of what we've talked about is that piece around the existing systems and structures that we have and how we start to think about breaking them and reforming them. And one of the things, Jenny, that you brought up, that I think there's two things that particularly stood out as you were speaking for me. One is about that sense of that tension so I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the museum. We've been talking a lot about doing work in the museum it's not about but troubling the museum, troubling it and actually acknowledging that tension as a place to start that conversation around the kind of systems and structures that we need to. And I just wondered if any of you had anything to respond to in terms of that, how, that beginning process, or are we further than that?
I think often when we discuss like inclusion and equality within a corporate setting or within an educational setting, it's a business thing. It's not done for the goodness of the people, and it's not done for the people. It's done so you can say that you got this award, or you're doing this because you have been pressured to do it, whereas that is just the result of the structures that have existed and that why we're in this mess, because we don't care truly about the people that we want to include. Everyone's journey into, say, an institution like this is so fundamentally different, and it's purely reliant on your background and what you've experienced, and even just thinking that you can be here. And even when you get here, like earlier on in the talk, we were talking about, Trinity does great for, helping people through their degree and they get to the end, but then they go into the world and it's scary. But for me, I got to Trinity and I was surrounded by people whose parents went to college, who, mums and dads were lecturers. Like, that's what I have to compete against, and that's what I have to see. And that's not fair or equal, and there's no policy that can change that. We have to look back and restart.
I also think, the idea of diversity in terms of what your workforce looks like, or your academic staff and all of that, and they're all important conversations, but you can have a diversity that's still always had a platform of some degree. People may be looking to increase their privilege to be equal to their male counterparts, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's from all sectors of society in terms of experience. But what we don't see is people really, really fighting for socio-economic grounds within the Equality Act. There's loads of other spent convictions. We have so many people in Ireland who have had a conviction in their past who cannot get a job. They cannot study the likes of social work, because they'll be if they have to go on a placement. So they're all class issues for people that don't actually get acknowledged, and they're things that you can really begin to fight on, in terms of actually making sure that people have access beyond, just the kind of tokenism of it in a sense. Yeah. Mary.
Yeah, just to come in on that, and it's not only about looking for equality with the male counterparts, it's also about looking for equality for the cohort of our women staff who there is no pathway for to progress, and for to help that as well. So, I mean, we have women across every socio-economic as employees in this college, okay? And I'm from a I broke a socio-economic barrier in what I done and where I got today. But I done that and I worked for that. So there needs to be a bit of you wanting to do it and you progressing and you looking for it and what's needed for it, as well as a bit of bringing to them as well. So it's not only about equality with our male counterparts, it's also about equality of opportunity with our female counterparts as well across the different grades of staff that we have.
I think also the discussion can come back to how we think about curriculum and connecting together across college. You know, we work often in silos, yet there's so much to be gained by these like cross-sectional conversations around equality, diversity, inclusivity. I mean, I'm just thinking about the fact that 84% of advertisements that we see represent sexualized women. Why are we standing for that today? What message does that give to young children? Just at Christmas, a campaign was taken down that H&M did, representing young girls, in school uniform. And their caption was, "Head turner." How is that being permitted? And it goes back to this greater conversation around that there's bodies that are continuing perpetuating like toxicity. And not only do we have to bring that into the conversation, we need to integrate it into our curriculum. We need to make sure that there's future leaders that are going to be like addressing this, changing the system and having more representation. And I think, there's several wicked problems that are out there, but we have an opportunity in a space such as this, in an environment such as this, where we wish for critical thinking, to actually think about how we can innovate and actually make what we do here more inclusive as well.
I think it's important that we do that together, because I think often still, if we still speak from people that have got like degrees on degrees on degrees, like you lose so much perspective in that, and like how we value education as like education is very important, but you learn a lot more. You learn also outside of just getting a piece of paper and outside going to college. And so I think that needs to be actually valued in order for us to move forward as well.
So maybe a somewhat controversial question. The Prof Linda mentioned earlier on International Women's Day, there's less happening. Do we need International Women's Day?
Yeah. Like I might struggle with it.
And that's the kind of, we struggle with it.
But I think it needs to be rethought a little bit, like you know what I mean? Like like imagine Trinity next year, or like the societies decided to go and co-create International Women's Days and all the different communities elsewhere. We have to make International Women's Day less insular. Like I spoke at a big corporate event last year, and I don't usually agree to, right? But they were offering a lot of money. But I don't. The money went. I didn't take the money. I donated the money. So but I was like, God, these people are going to pay me grands to talk for 20 minutes. That's nuts. You know what I mean? And I think other people who come from like money doesn't matter kind of go, that's not. And I'm like, whoa, like I could be doing this for a living. Why am I in politics? But so I donated that to Sister Sheds anyway, which is working class women, two girls, one girl from Jobstown and one from Finglas, and they've set up Sister Sheds all over Dublin, with very organic, very from the ground up, very 80s feel to it actually. Like it was kind of during COVID, women, and I know we didn't have COVID in the 80s, but nobody was a morgue maybe. So that was the similarity. Yeah. But the thing was, I wasn't comfortable going into that space unless I asked for free tickets for the women. Like it was hundreds of euro to go to that, to talk about being a leader or being this and that. So them women were brought in, And then obviously I put to the room that they need to be funded and they need skills shares and they need all these things. And people generally respond. They kind of go, well, we wouldn't know where to even find women and groups, and you know what I mean? And it's like, so there's that we have to find ways that when we're celebrating International Women's Day, we're not recreating the kind of divides by only having International Women's Day that are focused on each other or in our own little spaces. I think it needs to kind of be spread out much more. And you know, like imagine Trinity next year decided to fund International Women's Day events in the surrounding communities, or you know, like stuff like that, so that you're kind of, you know, you're just being more aware of, you know, the different type of women and having access to the conversation.
Yeah, like Lynn, and this probably goes against the battle that I done all those 30 years ago about fighting for, you know, equal pay and equal access for our women workers to the pension scheme. But you know, today I wonder, do we need it? And like, why should we be amazed that we have our first woman provost? You know, why should we be amazed that we have our first woman anything? And that's a battle I have with myself. But yeah, do we? And maybe Lynn is right. Look at it about every aspect of society, right across the whole board, and the different groupings of women that we have. So I still having that internal battle about, you know, should we be having International Women's Day? I grew up one of 9, 6 brothers, and I felt that every day was International Man's Day, Wives' Day, wherever, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, it definitely invokes a lot of reflection. You'd hope in the future we wouldn't necessarily be having to have this conversation because it was pervasive, it was omnipresent, it just exists. But at the same time, could we not reflect on this creatively? There's so much capacity in this room in itself to think about outcomes. You know, what would we want to see? What would a future projection look like? What would the outcomes of everything all of us have discussed and put together be like if we got down and started to envision that, to see something from this tangibly? I would love to do that. I would spend this day co-creating. You know, you talked about the co-creation and actually envisioning what the new wheel would look like. Why not?
Yeah, you talked about a human rights approach, which
I think like it's International Women's Day. I think even when I was asked by lovely Anya to come and speak at this, I also was very hesitant because I don't know, I don't really see so much value in coming into a room and talking to people that have all of similar experiences. I feels like, okay, I'm just, especially as a trans person, I kind of go into these rooms and I feel a little tokenized a little bit, and so that's why I focused on the human rights aspect, because it's important in every space you go to that if you have the voice that you use it. And I think, you know, the question of should we have an International Women's Day speaks to perhaps the insular nature of Trinity, and that the need to look outside of ourselves, and that there are things bigger than Colostan na Trinoja, and that we have a role in it.
Thanks, Jane. I think one of the things, Lynn, that you were talking about that struck me as well is that piece about this, which I thought you articulated really well, just that this idea of this being a place of power, but also then what happens when that goes out further into society, and how, you know, how we start to think about changing and dismantling the existing systems and structures. Given your experiences where you are now, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we could spend ages on that, but where do we start? Like with all of this, you know, where do we? Is it about us creating a new vision for? Where do we start to take those systems and structures apart?
Well, I think there's a million things. That's the difficulty of it, isn't it? Like you can never just name one big thing, and that's, you know, unless it's, I don't know, born to place. Not do you know what I mean? Like starting from scratch. It's like, how do you even do that? How do you start from scratch? Like, do you know what I mean? So how do you think about that? It's, you know, but like, there's just so many things. And you look at even the curriculum. I mean, the curriculum was mentioned. Who's the curriculum written by?
Yeah.
whose version of history is the curriculum written about? Like, I mean, so many experiences of especially working class women or women who haven't ordinarily been in the media or on platforms or in universities or anything like that, you know, they never told their stories. Somebody's always telling it for them. Do you know what I mean? So you have to not only go back to, well, who's teaching something, but what is the actual curriculum, and why are some lecturers doing the same curriculum for 40 years, like, you know? So you have to also challenge what's being taught in the room. Like, I mean, if you come to Trinity and study economics, you're mostly going to get a conservative understanding of economics, but there is other versions of economics to be learned. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's social economics, there's loads of different ways. So I think challenging the curriculum within Trinity so that people don't leave with this very siloed view of what, like, I must know all the things now because this is the education that I received in Trinity, so that must be accurate. But that's just one version of life and reality, and I think if we really want to look at the impact of Trinity, and like the impact of Trinity on the country has been huge, but we need to know that that impact has been somewhat conservative when people go off into their different sectors or even into teaching. Do you know what I mean? And we talk about debt, like no one talks about the fact that debt hasn't actually narrowed the gap between the wealthy and the poor, and we're all going to keep going debt, and it's absolutely wrong to keep supporting the idea that debt is somehow solving something in Ireland just because the literacy levels have risen or people reaching Leaving Cert has risen. The thing is, it was supposed to narrow the gap, the educational gap, because the gap has got wider. Do you know what I mean? But nobody's challenging them things. Do you know what I mean? So I think we have to be able to look at some of those things in terms of what are we actually teaching people when it comes to professions, what are we actually sending them out in the world in terms of their understanding of life and stuff, you know? So I think an overhaul of the curriculum would be a great start in terms of, you know, dismantling some power ideas.
Yeah. Is there anyone who wants to come in with questions or, yeah?
Thank you so much for all your inspiring speeches. Senator Moran touched on an important point about working with communities where you might be trying to change something, but there's fear of change. So how do you inspire change when there's fear?
You see, I don't think there's fear of change. I think, you know, like, you know, my choices now look very different than they did 15 years ago, right? So like, if you're in a community and your choice is not will I study engineering or will I study health sciences? Do you know what I mean? That's not your choice. Your choice is, will I be able to go and sit my Leaving Cert, or should I go and maybe study LCA, but then that won't do, like, your choices are so different and they're so it's not even a fear. So, you know, we talk about, say, the equality of opportunity, and that's a myth we need to challenge massively. There is no equality of opportunity. Just because you create something, just because you introduce free fees, doesn't mean that you've created equality of opportunity, because the ingredients in which goes into the conditions in which we live. What we need is equality of one's conditions. And then you'll remove the fears, you'll remove the lack of choice, because like people, like, it's not an accident that there's a large portion of people in like Tala West who experience high levels of poverty, low levels of education. It's not accidental. We didn't all just go, oh, you know, we don't really want an education and we choose all here to live in Tala. It's all by design, like, it's all by design. Like, my dad grew up in Usher's Quay in the tenements, just not far from here. And Trinity wouldn't have been a place that he even thought of going, even though he could see it and looked at it, do you know what I mean? And I think he probably visited here once when he had to play a football match and stuff. So it's not necessarily fear of change, right? It's not knowing what else there is, you know. And I think I always go back to Tupac's song. That's just the way it is, right? And at some level, sometimes we tell ourselves that this is just the way it is. So we succumb to how difficult it is to progress. We succumb to that's just not a place for us, or that other place not for us, or maybe we're just not smart enough. And all of those things are completely untrue. But again, the systems make us believe that something is not for us. You know what I mean? Like, even in relation to, like, you know, universities not, you know, like, why is TAP still on Pear Street? Do you know what I mean? Like, why is TAP 25 years later still this other thing over there with the same amount of students that it was dealing with? Like, the Trinity Access Programme should be integrated into every single part of the campus. You know, it should be taking in 2,000 students a year. You know, it should have 200 staff. But again, we champion TAP, right? And lots of us have come through TAP, and lots of us are very grateful to that. But it hasn't expanded. Like, it has expanded in terms of its community reach, but not in terms of its campus, the amount of students that are here. So if you really want to transform as well, like having more people here, like, just why is Trinity not having 2,000 TAP students a year entering into the university? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no reason for it other than someone hasn't decided to do it. You know what I mean? And it's not to the fault of TAP, like, do you know what I mean? But like, you know, why would you still have an access programme 25 years later? It means the college is not actually really addressing educational disadvantage in its widest sense. It's only keeping an alternative route rather than completely dismantling the fact that it's needed in the first place. Your job is only done when you're not needed anymore. My counsellor used to tell me that. I think he was probably trying to say I need to keep going or something. Do you know? But your job is only done when you're not needed anymore, and we should all be looking to do ourselves out of a job, and TAP should have done out of a job. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can jump in then, I agree, and that's what I wanted to finish off on. It's not the positioning of TAP on Pier Street in West Monroe. It's that we shouldn't exist at all. And so that's why I thought you might kind of address, you spoke about poverty being fundamentally the biggest issue, and we can see the haves and the have-nots, it's growing, the chasm is growing. And the word still exists in volumes. How do you propose eradicating or addressing those poverty-based issues so that it might allow for something like TAP and all access programs across the country to cease to exist, because we would have the equality of conditions that would allow for equality of opportunity and would not necessitate any of these alternative entry routes that we operate currently. So what suggestions do you have is happening now when it is growing?
Like, nobody is campaigning to end poverty.
Yeah.
Nobody is campaigning on it. The Combat Poverty Agency was dismantled in 2008, 2009, as austerity hit working class communities and poverty increased. And it was called a useless quango, right? And so the problem is that I think people see poverty as a thing that can't be solved. Everyone cares about it, right? But caring is not enough. So we care about people. We care about people's experiences. But there is some level of acceptance to that, as if poverty is a characteristic of certain groups of people, but it's not a characteristic. Do you know what I mean? It's complete moral luck. It's complete moral luck. So the thing is, we need to actually build momentum on ending poverty. And that means we have to have a conversation about neoliberalism. But no one wants to have a conversation about neoliberalism because we're all operating within capitalist structures. So it's also deeply ingrained in us that we're not actually challenging it at all. And the problem is we don't actually challenge the systems. Again, it goes back to the systems and the structures, and it goes back to neoliberal policies. It goes back to then how do you solve the problem of poverty without at least acknowledging that we're capitalists.
And what you were saying earlier about like so much of my family would be like, oh well, things, that's just the way it is. But also in places like this, it's also the same mindset of that's just the way it is. But it doesn't have to be. I understand why it would maybe benefit people in places like this because that's where they've got where they are. But like I have experienced discrimination far more because I've had to work through college from lecturers than I ever had because I'm trans. Like I've been punished academically, just people talking down at me because of, you know, I was late because I have a much longer commute or because there's only the 27 bus is dreadful. Like it's just like it never, you said that, you know, people do care, but I don't think they do, because if they did care, they need to show it better.
If I just very briefly, Lynn, because I know we're coming up to time and I'm worrying about 3 o'clock at night. Have to go back and do the day's walk. No, it's not. It's actually walk, Lynn. So it's talking about it's just the way it is, that's not for me, and talking about your father. Elaine spoke about it on her video. She grew up beside Trinity College and she didn't think it was for her. I grew up beside Trinity College. I was 24, now I'm going to let out how old I am. I was 24 years of age when I came into Trinity College, and the first time I set foot in Trinity College, even though I only grew up down the road, was when I came for my very first interview over 30 years ago. Okay? So it is a bit of, well, that's not for me, and rather than question why is it not for me, that bit of acceptance. So it's not about change, it's about what we will accept and what we will challenge. And maybe there's a bit more challenging to be done in all aspects.
Yeah. I think just to, because I know we're coming up on time, but I think just to kind of gather some thoughts, I think there's a really interesting conversation is here today, and I think it's something that needs to continue. I think it would be wonderful to see an opportunity for this piece, particularly around Lynn's points as well around poverty. But I think one of the things, my experience, I had a recent conversation actually just last night with a friend who has quite severe mental health issues, and one of the things that he said to me was, I just can't seem to fit in that version of the world. And I thought it was a really desperately, you know, I mean, in the context that I was hearing it, sad at the time, and but what I wanted to say to him was, but why do you have to fit in that? Why can't you
be you?
Can't you exist here in this place? And that's a very, I don't mean to reduce it, but my point is, I suppose, is that we're here today and we're talking about the barriers that have been broken and all of the things that have been achieved. And yes, things have been achieved, and yet we find ourselves where, in some ways, those different versions of how we could all be and make space in this world are still not visible. And those structures and systems still need to be challenged. So I suppose I'd finish by saying, what's our next conversation about that? What's our next point where we meet in this room, as Jenny said, and acknowledge the tension and trouble and challenge that and think about those structures and systems and what those other places are. And just to say, I think thank you to all of our speakers today who have all spoken so passionately and from the heart in terms of what today is about, and thank you to the organisers and Anya and all the guys in the Hist.